Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Martyr. Thank you, Rabbi Lipsey, for the opportunity to share some thoughts. I've always valued curiosity more than almost any other trait. Someone who's curious is one of those people who knows that they don't know everything, and I always loved that. Imagine what it would be like if all of our leaders were constantly curious. Someone who sees differences as strengths, not threats. So it's not actually an insight to say that society is being torn. Here in Israel, I would argue it's by an increasing tendency to devalue and discourage curiosity of what the other person is thinking. Public discourse discourages openness today, openness to alternative ideas and understandings. It's amazing, but we're banning books again in libraries in this country. It's amazing, but we're stopping speakers from speaking on campuses. All of this kind of conversation, this lack of conversation, is happening in Israel today too. The focus of the conversation right now is on what's being referred to as judicial reform, but I'll say it's more than reform. Most Israelis, most commentators would describe what's going on right now as nothing less than a threat to their democratic society. It's a serious threat. I want to make something very, very clear because I had some people read my drash and apparently it wasn't exactly clear. So I want to be very, very clear about this. What's happening right now in Israel is horrifying to me. I really do believe they're seeking to stop the checks and balances that a healthy society embraces. I'm even more distressed that the ruling government includes ministers who are proud to profess hatred of people other than them, hatred of Arabs, hatred of people in the LGBTQ community, hatred of Jews whose views of Judaism don't comport with the most extreme forms of Judaism. Now, I want to also be clear. I'm in no way in favor of eliminating the voices who would be described as being on the right. What I'm saying is that the current government in Israel is working very hard to eliminate the voices who lean left. And I would argue disingenuously are doing so, they say, in the name of Judaism. From my own reading, nothing could be further from the truth. Our texts, our tradition, are filled with reminders that we as Jews place on learning and being open to learning from an extremely wide range of inputs. Let me start with this Parsha today. We have this double Parsha, Vayakhel-Pekudei. It's all about the completion of the building of the Mishkan, the portable home that God instructs us to build for God's eminence. We read about the building of the Mishkan for 5 parshiot. It's a pretty incredible fact if you think about how short the Torah is in total. And our sages remind us that there aren't any wasted words in the Torah. So as Rabbi Lipsey was saying earlier, we even are repeating some of what we read today from earlier parshiot. We should be, I think, extremely curious about why we're repeating these things. And I think there are some answers in the particulars in the Chumash. I'm not going to reread it for you, but if you want to look at it, it's on page 554 in the Chumash at our seats. what I think is really extraordinary about this, and Rabbi Lipsey was referencing this, about the different functions and the different gifts and skills and services that the people brought to the building of the Mishkan. Those were the skills and the services and the gifts that they brought because it moved them to bring them. We could ask ourselves why those were the elements that they were bringing. You can read all about these. They brought blue, purple, crimson yarn, fine linen, goat hair, tan ram skins, dolphin skins, everyone who made gifts of silver, copper. I mean, it's a rather extraordinary list. I would argue the reason their hearts were moved to bring these particular gifts is that's who they were. They were artisans. They were specialists. They were technicians working with these very materials. God knew it, and they were valued because they were bringing these gifts which they knew. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrona Livracha, observed on this parsha, the greatness of the tabernacle project was that it was a collective achievement, one in which not everyone did the same thing. Each gave a different thing, and each contribution was valued, and therefore, each participant felt valued. Vayakhel, Moshe's ability to forge out of the dissolution of the people a new and genuine kehillah, was one of our greatest leaders' greatest achievements. Last week, one of my friends, Rabbi Seth Farber, who is the founder of an organization called ETEAM, which is dedicated to the protection of rights of every Israeli citizen, and who also happens to be, and I think this is critical, who also happens to be a modern Orthodox rabbi of his own community in Ra'anana. He wrote an op-ed in the Times of Israel, and I want to parse out a little piece of it. Here's what Seth said. While the legislative reform package, which sees no sign of letting up, is perceived as a threat to democracy, or at least a certain type of democracy, that it's the next wave of legislation that threatens to undermine the Jewish character of the state of Israel, and that's something that should worry every Jew in Israel and in the diaspora, right or left. There is a concern, a real concern, that the new religious legislation seeks to wipe out our differences. I want to emphasize again, this is an Orthodox rabbi writing this, and make Jewish tradition in Israel monolithic and monopolistic. Rather than recognize that our diversity is to be celebrated, our distinct paths incorporated into the Jewish tapestry, heresies that have been born out of a myopic view of Jewish life and a deep sense of entitlement seek to cancel anything other than that one man's view. And yes, we are certainly talking about one man of Jewish life. Seth goes on to reference a section of Talmud, Masechet Brachot, 58a. And so I called one of my rabbis who has been teaching me Talmud for the last 25 years, Rabbi David Hoffman, who also happens to be the president of the Honey Foundation. And I said, David, I want to learn this Talmud together. And so we did. And I want to share a tiny piece of this. The sages taught in a Tosefta. One who sees the multitudes of Israel recite. So you got to just think about what he's talking about, what the Rabbaim are talking about here. They're talking about one who's looking out into probably thousands of Israelites who have come together for some reason. One who sees this multitude should recite, "Blessed who knows all secrets." So the sages go on to ask this question, why is this the blessing we say? Because we see a whole nation whose, and now I'm quoting the Talmud again, whose minds are unlike each other and whose faces are unlike each other. Ben Zoma once saw a multitude of Israel while standing on a stair of the Temple Mount. He immediately recited this blessing: "Blessed are you, God, who knows all secrets. Blessed are you, God, who created all of these to serve me." So here we have this proof text in the book of arguments that we call the Talmud, where opposing voices are naturally presented, that when we see a large group of Jews together, we're to say this blessing: "Blessed are you, God, who knows all secrets." Why? Because we're all different. We've all got different secrets in our hearts and in our minds. We all come with different faces. And it's Ben Zoma, who is the rabbi who we read about in Pirkei Avot, who says, "Who is wise? He's the one who learns from everyone." He says we should say this everywhere when we see the multitude, but particularly we should say it when we are at the Beit HaMikdash. Life and everything we enjoy in our lives are produced by these multitudes. Not by one person, not by one community, not by one skill. Different people, different skills. We rely on them to enjoy the life all of us lead. Diversity is not a concept that we should tolerate or accept. It's what we fundamentally need for human existence and service of God. This message is incredibly resonant to me. As Rabbi Martyr just said, we just came back from a trip to Israel working on our Honey Foundation work. The Honey Foundation message is, I said this probably 10 different times to 10 different rabbis in their communities this week. Communities and the multitude of Jews that we're the secret. We're the answer to the dilemma of a lack of curiosity. It's not the immediacy that we might feel when we protest, when we shout and scream. It doesn't resolve the problem immediately, but I would argue, and I do argue, that when we're in Israel and we're seeing all these different communities across the entire religious spectrum, they're the answer. And the rabbi who's leading them is the leverage point. I would urge us all to take a moment in our days to message to whomever you speak with in Israel, friends or reporters or politicians or community organizers, that you understand that this lack of curiosity, this closed nature of society is damaging. We should join together and remember that building something as important as the Mishkan required all of us. And I would end by saying we should learn once again from Ben Zoma. We should say blessings to God. We should praise God for creating us both in God's image, but at the same time different from one another with unique and highly valued skills and perceptions. Shabbat Shalom.